Hello and welcome to Records Rebuilds. We've got some fairly exciting news to share with you tonight, and that's because the torque curve has just been released for the all-new LT6. That's the high-revving, flat-plane crank engine that is going in the 2023 C8 Z06. Earlier today, there was sort of an online PowerPoint presentation given by Tad Schechter to media types and YouTube influencers. I am just a random guy in his garage, not a YouTube influencer. So we're going to be using some of the low resolution versions of the frames from that PowerPoint that we got off of MidEngineCorvetteForum.com. And we're just going to take a look at why we really like this power curve and why we're so impressed with it, and even a little bit of the technology of how they were able to achieve this. So let's go ahead and take a look. One quick note before we get started. I know a lot of our subscribers are on the Z06 list at Ciocca Corvette. As you can see in the flyer here, the dealer tour starts there this weekend. They've got time available for people who are on the list as well as the general public. So if you're itching to get a look at the new Z06 and you live anywhere near Atlantic City, New Jersey, head down there. Okay, so I just want to say right from the start, I really love this torque curve. From the moment that we found out that the C8 Z06 was going to be a high-revving, flat-plane crank engine, our main worry was torque, because a lot of times our Italian or Japanese friends have made high-revving engines with a lot of horsepower, but they have to be small engines, and they lose a lot of torque down low because of that, whereas our American engines have always been big V8s that provide a lot of torque right from the outset. And that's kind of what's most fun on the street, that feeling when you hit the gas and it leaves your insides 5 feet behind you. That is torque that makes you feel that way. So we were worried that we would be losing torque on this engine, and it really looks like in a big way that is not the case. So first thing is this torque curve is really flat. SAE put out an article just this week about just how flat this torque curve is. So this engine puts out a maximum of 460 pound-feet of torque, and we're getting almost 460 anywhere from about 3,500 RPM all the way up to that 8,600 RPM red line. That torque curve is even better than the C7 Stingray, which has a ton of torque. Now, of course, it doesn't have a supercharger shoving air down into the engine like we have with the LT4 from the C7 Z06, but that advantage fades pretty quickly on the racetrack where the air gets hot and all of a sudden you lose a lot of the torque that the Z06 could make on the dyno sheet. We know that Chevrolet wants the new Z06 to be their best track car ever, so we know they're wanting a naturally aspirated engine so that it can go out there and continue to lay down awesome lap times, lap after lap after lap for 30 or 40 minutes, and that's not going to happen if we're using a supercharger. Okay, so this is the torque curve of the Ferrari 458 Italia. It's a car that's considered by many to be one of the finest naturally aspirated sports cars in history, and it's certainly a car that GM was looking to try to beat for less than half the price. Now, you'll notice right off the bat that the Corvette has a distinct advantage. Its maximum horsepower is about 100 horsepower higher than the Ferrari, and its torque is about 72 pound-feet of torque higher as far as your maximums, and that's mainly due to engine size. The Corvette is about a liter bigger than the Ferrari, so you expect that advantage there. But something unexpected is the shape of this torque curve. If you look at that orange line there, you'll see that the Ferrari really peaks around 6,000 to 6,500 RPMs, and there's significant drop-off on both sides of that, whereas if you look back at the Corvette curve, you don't see that kind of drop-off at all, and that's one of the things that we're really excited about. Now here we have the incredibly impressive C7 Z06. You might be really tempted to do the math and say, whoa, this new Z06 is down 180 pound-feet of torque versus the old model. And you could look at it that way. But if you look at this graph here, you can see there's a significant peak with the supercharger there. And you can see that by the time you get up and the higher range of horsepower, around 5,500 to 6,000 RPM, you're down to 600, 575, or even 550 pound-feet of torque. So it's not nearly as flat as the curve we're dealing with on this new Z06. Now, that's still a significant amount of extra torque compared to the 470 pound-feet that the new Z06 will be packing. Fortunately, though, the new mid-engine architecture, along with the dual-clutch transmission, allows us to get the power to the ground much better and to shift through more gears faster than we could with the old transmission. Because of that, even though that C7 Z06 has more torque with the supercharger, its quarter mile time is 10.95 seconds, and the C8 Z06 with less torque has a faster quarter mile time of 10.6 seconds. So I don't think you need to be worried about that decrease in torque. It's a more reliable engine that can carry on far longer without heat soak and still is going to get you better times, even in something it's not really meant to do, like a quarter mile time. Okay, now we'll start to pull some slides from the General Motors slide deck. This first one here is just to show you that they have been building this engine, at least in prototype form, for the past 6.5 years. Now, the big thing I wondered when I first saw this picture when they announced this engine is, what the heck is that huge thing on top of the engine? I mean, that is bigger than the supercharger that used to sit on top of the old Z06 engine. Well, it turns out it's a thing called a Helmholtz Resonator. So what exactly does this thing do? Well, here's our mass airflow sensor here, and here's our air intake. So air is going to be flowing in through here and going down into each of these trumpets to get to each cylinder so that it can be burned. Now, the unique feature here is we've got these 3 valves here, and what they can do is essentially change the length of this chamber, and that will change the resonance. So how is that going to help us? Okay, so just a quick science demonstration here. If we take this empty beer bottle and we blow on it, we get one sound. Then, if we take that same empty beer bottle and we fill it with water, I think you can see that in there, it's going to make a different sound. So, what just happened there? Well, basically, when we added the water to the bottle, we changed the length of the bottle, and that changed the frequency with which the air vibrated and therefore the flow of the air. So the idea with this Helmholtz resonator is that we can change the length of that chamber effectively, and that's going to allow us to fine-tune the flow of the air to get the highest flow at each individual RPM. So using this method, Corvette engineers have been able to increase volumetric efficiency to 115%. That basically means that they're able to increase the density of the air going into the cylinders by about 15% without the use of a turbocharger or supercharger and any of the negative effects that those devices have. Now you can see on the slide here that General Motors used over 50 analytical models to determine the best orientation for this air intake, and this is the best design they were able to come up with. So you can see here there are actually 4 distinct bumps on our torque curve, and each of those actually represents a different position for those Helmholtz valves that we were talking about. This is the one slide that I really wish I had a higher resolution version of. If I find one later, I'll put a link to it in the description. But basically, you can see each of these dotted lines is one of the configurations of our Helmholtz valves. Now, the purple one there at the top is if all the valves are closed. The blue one is if all of them are open. I can't tell what the red one and the green one say, but by opening and closing those valves in whatever sequence we want to, we can achieve the best of all worlds, so we get a very flat torque curve, and that's the whole purpose of this big, huge intake that sits on top of this engine. So, there you have it. That's everything I know about the torque curve on the new LT6 that's going in the next Z06. If you liked that, there were about 90 PowerPoint slides released today, and they talk a lot about really cool innovations in the new car. The oil scavenge pumps much improved because the RPM is much higher than before. So if you want to see videos about any of that stuff, maybe leave a comment down below. We may take on some of that stuff in the future. And if you're wondering why is this guy's head where the muffler should be on a C7 Corvette, that's because we do a lot of rebuild videos on this channel as well. Currently, we're in the middle of rebuilding this wrecked 2015 Corvette, and I'm just finishing up the modifications that allow an automatic transmission Z51 car to keep the transmission cool on track. So look forward to that video in the future. And other than that, thanks a lot for watching, guys. Like, share, subscribe, all that if you feel it's appropriate. And we'll see you next time.